So, royalists and pensioners, how many freezing old people is King Charles worth? How many pensioners should have to shiver through the winter to ensure His Highness can continue to live a fairy tale existence of publicly funded pleasure? A couple of hundred freezing old people, is that enough? A few thousand pensioners. 10,000 80-year-olds, 100,000, more pensioners? Well, yes, the answer is actually more, but that's only if we view the situation through the lens of the King's latest pay rise, which is what we're about to do. Because the papers let slip this week, with hardly any fanfare at all, that King Charles has won a huge pay rise. In percentage terms, it dwarfs what ASLEF has won for train drivers and what the BMA has done for doctors, as Chaz is going to trouser an astonishing 50% pay rise this year, equating to £45 million extra in hard cash. That would keep 155,000 80-year-old pensioners. It would keep their winter fuel allowance of £300. 150,000 pensioners could keep their winter fuel allowance if King Charles didn't have a 50% pay rise. It's not a bad increase either, really, is it? The King has seen a huge profit of £1.1 billion from his Crown estate, a percentage of which funds the monarchy, which means the sovereign grant, which supports the official duties of the royal family, will rise from £86 million this year to £132 million next. Not a bad increase, particularly when, Charles is brushed with cancer, and of course his daughter-in-law Kate have meant the royals have been cutting back on their official duties. 2,300 appearances this year compared with 2,700 the year before. A 50% pay rise for 15% less work. It's a nice gig if you can get it, and not a word of criticism from the same MPs who are happy to deny pensioners their winter fuel allowance. Not a word. Oh, don't be so churlish, Matthew. Charles hasn't been well, and Buckingham Palace Backhouse, it needs a lot of renovation work. OK, fine. Points taken. But when my mate Mick was dying of cancer, he didn't get a 50% increase in his pension, nor did he get financial help improving his housing. Indeed, almost half of everyone who gets cancer has to continue working to make ends meet. But of course not our king. And once again, I'm shocked, I tell you, to see what a nation of obedient serfs we are, just sucking this up. Charles, as I said, seen Crown Estate profits double to 1.1 billion. That's up from 443 million the previous year, driven by proceeds from the sale of options and leases on offshore wind projects on the seabed, because the king, the Crown Estate, owns the seabed and therefore has responsibility for auctioning off offshore wind rights. Can't be right, can it? That's such a huge pay rise when pensioners, we've been told by the new government that basically we're getting more austerity, that pensioners are going to have to go without their winter fuel allowance so that we can repair one of 7 palaces that the royal family inhabit. 7 palaces. Why doesn't he pay for it himself? Why is there any public money going into this? 0345 6060 973. I'd love to hear from any pensioners out there whether you're happy to shiver your way through the winter knowing that King Charles's palace, Buckingham Palace, is going to be restored and that he's got a 50% pay rise. I'd love to know how you feel about that. Right chuffed, some of you. Very angry, perhaps more. 0345 6060 973, the number. Well, Jack Royston is Chief Royal Correspondent at Newsweek, and I'm going to go to him first for some guidance. Good morning to you, Jack.
Good morning. Thank you for having me on.
My pleasure. Now, obviously, it's not all going to go straight into King Charles's pockets, but just in terms of sort of metrics, it doesn't look good, does it, that we're depriving pensioners of their winter fuel allowance and giving a king a 50% rise?
No, it doesn't look good. There's a few caveats, I think, that are important to make. So what has happened here is that, like you said, because the Crown Estate, which is a public asset, owns huge swathes of the seabed, that's where all the offshore wind was put. The renewable energy market has gone absolutely through the roof, and that has meant that the king now has an embarrassingly large amount of cash because he isn't given a specified amount of money each year. He's given a percentage of the profits of the Crown Estate, and the rest of those profits go to the government to fund schools, hospitals, hypothetically, potentially the winter fuel allowance. So it's embarrassing for him. There is some talk that down the line they're going to have to change this, possibly 26, 27. They're going to have to bring in, new laws to make sure that he gets a lower amount of money, because it's more than the royal family need. But there is also a broader issue, which I think your debate speaks to, which is that the royal family are going to have to work really very, very, very hard to try to show the British public that they are deserving of their power and wealth in society in the years to come, because it's not just pensioners. Young people in Britain as well have a very difficult road ahead of them.
The coronation, he paid 10% of the coronation costs. The taxpayer, we pay 90%. When he's got profits of £1.1 billion. I am a Republican, okay? Everyone knows that. But, it doesn't sit well.
And the younger generation of today have a particular view of power and privilege, inherited wealth, inherited power and privilege, which is rooted in the fact that they have a very difficult life ahead of them. They have a lot of climate anxiety, but they also have AI coming down the line, which is going to take a lot of jobs. They're going to live very, very difficult lives with the cost of living going up, harder than ever to get on the housing market. And this is the generation of people who increasingly are turning against the monarchy. We've had polling out just this week showing that more than 50% of Gen Z, of kind of 18 to 24-year-olds, have a negative view of the monarchy.
I didn't see that. That's very interesting. Very interesting.
And so I think what the royals are going to have to look at, this actual specific issue of the money they get paid from offshore wind is quite difficult for them to deal with, because apart from anything else, once the law has to be changed by the government, they can't change it themselves. And even once it's changed, they have no control over where the money goes once it's back in public coffers. But they also have two other property estates. The Crown Estate is the one that is kind of actually owned by us, and I think it is very important. The Duchy of Cornwall was Prince William's, was Charles's, but it passed to Prince William when the Queen died. And then the Duchy of Lancaster funds the King and Queen Camilla and other royals. So they have these two other very lucrative property estates. I think they have a collective value of something like 1.5 billion, I think it is. Forgive me for having not got the figure at the tip of my mind. But they need to start working out how they can use some of those funds in a way that really shows the public that they understand how hard life is becoming for people. Actually, both pensioners and the oldest and the youngest are the generations that are getting squeezed the most at the moment. One thing as well that I think Charles has had this long-standing ambition going back decades that he needs, the monarchy needs to slim down the monarchy in terms of the actual number of royals who appear on the Buckingham Palace balcony or who do jobs as working royals. But for me, I've never really been aware of anybody caring about that. I think when the public think about royal wealth, they don't think of the number of royals. They think of the number of residences. They think of the number of helicopter flights. They think of private jets. And so I think these are the things that the monarchy needs to focus on. I think residences could be a really particularly big one for them to look at, because they do, they have Sandringham, which they only use really over Christmas and New Year, maybe a little bit in kind of winter, spring, and then they have Balmoral, which they use in the summer. Then they have Charles has property in Wales. There's Highgrove in the west of England. There are a lot of houses.
Yeah.
And they also, they all have to be looked after, all year round in order that they don't go to wreck and ruin. So that's something that they could look at. If they were to perhaps sell one really big, famous property and invest the money in tackling homelessness, for example, or helping with the winter fuel allowance, or something like that.
Jack, they need someone like you. You need to give up your work at Newsweek and start giving them some counsel, I think. Jack Royston, pleasure talking to you. I will pay more attention to royal reports on Newsweek as a consequence. Listening to that, Richard Murphy, political economist, Director of Tax Research UK, Professor of Accounting Practice at the Sheffield University Management School. Good morning to you, Richard. Lovely talking to you. Am I being unfair here to contrast the plight of freezing pensioners with a single king?
Well, as a pensioner who has lost out on his winter fuel allowance, I could feel a little bit annoyed about this. Because I am a pensioner, I'm still at work like so many now are. But that doesn't stop me saying this feels horribly unfair for those many pensioners, and there are millions of them who will now lose the winter fuel allowance who did really depend upon it. But that's not the key issue here. Let's just stand back a little bit.
Right.
I'm no big fan of royalty. Let's be honest as well. You have been, I will be, I'll lay my cards on the table. I've been a member of Republican organisations since about 1988. So I'm quite clear about that.
Yeah.
But if the people of this country want a monarchy, okay, I can live with there being a monarchy, but not one that, for example, does benefit in the way that our current monarchy is. It is absolutely ludicrous that the edge of the UK, the waterlines and the seabeds are owned by the Crown.
It's bizarre, isn't it?
Why on earth is it? Why is the beach the property, once it's met the tide mark, why is the beach the property of King Charles? Why does he get the benefit of the fact that we're all moving green and there's going to be a lot more work done on the seabed to generate more energy? That makes absolutely zero sense at all. It says that we live in a society which values wealth and which values inheritance and which is fundamentally eugenic, saying that he has a right by birth to this, much more than it values any young person, any person of talent, any person doing anything in this country, because he gets this by right, other people have to work for it. And that is at the very core of what is wrong with the values in our society. Yeah, I don't mind Prince Charles, sorry, he's not Prince Charles, King Charles, Prince William being paid for the work they do. I really don't mind if they're doing a valuable job, and I don't even mind if they're well paid for it. But well pay is, what, $1 million a year? Come on, guys. If you can't live on that, what are you doing? What evidence are you showing that you're in touch with the country you're supposedly head of state for? So this makes no sense. But let's come back to the core of this. We should not now have the Duchy of Cornwall paying for Prince William. The Duchy of Cornwall is deeply resented by many people that I happen to know, and some of whom I once represented as accountants when I was working as a working accountant in Cornwall itself, because they resented having a landlord who was called the Prince of Wales. They resented the fact that they were actually having to pay for the fact that they lived in this area and were therefore supporting the monarchy. The Duchy of Lancaster, we've just heard mentioned, why should that also be made available to the monarchy? It's not just that we're talking about the profits of the Crown Estate, which are expected to be £132 million next year, but we've got these other estates as well. Yes. It's time that this money was public property. It's time that if the royalty is to survive, they became working royals, as they would like to call themselves. In other words, they get a salary for what they do. And no, they don't need 7 palaces. No, 6 of those could quite happily pass over into the public, become museums, whatever else, National Trust properties, and be used for other purposes, or, as was said, in some cases, frankly, be sold for the benefit of providing alternative use.
When Jack was suggesting it, you think, they could maybe sell one of their palaces. And I'm like you, Richard. I mean, 7 palaces just feels taxpayer supported, taxpayer funded. It doesn't sit right with me. Kat is on the line from West Lothian. Good morning to you, Kat.
Yes, good morning, Matthew. Apologies, I've never phoned in before.
Oh, don't apologise. Welcome. Thank you.
But thank you for having me on, and clearly I'm quite passionate about this, and that's the reason I've dialed in. Now, what my point is, Matthew, on this, my son is at a private or an independent school, first of all. But my point on the fact that they're adding VAT and that us parents, who are apparently very, very rich and elite, have to then pay this extra VAT, which will be passed on.
Not extra VAT. VAT. You haven't paid VAT on it before, historically, since that was introduced.
The point on this is that the state schools are funded by the government. Now, if you look on the Gov website, it's just short of £8,000 a year. Now, we don't get that, okay? So, therefore, by default, that is going into the system. You understand?
Yeah,
so
I do understand.
Every year we don't get funded. I don't want to be funded by the government.
But that's your choice, isn't it? That's your choice. You're not funded by the government. You're funded by taxpayers.
Correct.
Yeah.
So there's no way that I want to be funded. It's a choice that I've made for my son. However, in any programme, this has never, ever been brought up or discussed that I've heard of. But it is a very important
It was discussed.
point.
It was discussed by Michael Pike 9 minutes ago. He said exactly that.
I missed that.
No, he said that you're. In fact, no, I think it was McGovern. He said you're paying twice. But it's a choice.
Yes.
And it's also, if I may say, absolutely irrelevant to the argument about VAT, which is VAT goes on just about everything. Why should fees for a privileged few, because it is a privileged few, you might not feel privileged, but you are more privileged than someone who can't afford it. Why should fees for those privileged few be VAT free? Why should private schools remain charities? Seems bizarre to me.
Because they do a lot of charity work.
Oh, do they?
And they fund places. So in my son's school, there's 2 people in his class that is fully funded.
Two people.
Yeah.
That's proper charity. That is. So
is
you would feel that if everybody paid
20%,
if everybody paid their VAT, we wouldn't have to argue about what wonderful work charities are doing, raising 2 children up, when you're actually helping 93% of the nation's children.
Yeah, so another point, Matthew, on this is the Edinburgh question, and I don't know if you've heard of that.
Go on.
But 30% or 1 in 4 pupils in Edinburgh go to private schools or independent schools. There is no places. So this is where my point is. There is no places that's not been well thought out to say people who have to take their children out of that school and put them into state school. There aren't the places there. So I understand that having a policy in place, but the fact is it's not well thought out.
But there's not much evidence yet, in fact, no evidence of this mass migration that everybody's been talking about. There's more private schools opened than closed in the last year. So we're worrying about something that hasn't happened. Ironically, it's a worry that's perpetuated in the pages of the Daily Telegraph that advocated for Brexit, which has allowed the Labour government to put VAT on school fees.
Yeah. And I
that
think
was rather stupid and short-sighted, wasn't it?
It certainly was. And I don't think, the thing is, they've put this in so fast that they haven't actually looked at it properly. And that's my point on this, is that, you know, when you're putting a policy such as this in place, and for me, I'm certainly not rich or elite or anything like that, and I have to seriously consider taking my son out of school.
Can you appreciate, Kat, that you don't think you're rich and elite, but you can afford to send your child to a private school?
Yeah.
Now, if you can't afford to send your child to a private school, how would you describe those people that can't afford it? Skint, impoverished, broke, normal? What are they?
No.
If you're not privileged, what are they?
They're normal people.
They're normal people. So you're not a normal person.
People.
You're not a normal person.
I am a normal person.
So you're the same. You're saying you're the same as someone who can't afford to send their kids to private school.
What I do is I prioritise my funds, and I know this is something.
What an insult! What an insult to everybody else who hasn't got enough funds to prioritise. It is.
Personally,
you're saying you manage your money better than other people.
Don't. A lot of people don't do that, is what I'm saying.
Right, OK.
I do that.
So it's other people's fault. All right, Kat, I get it. You made your point clear that you manage your money better than everybody else, which is why you're normal and your kids have a privileged education. So the 93% of people listening whose kids get a state education, you've heard it from Kat, you misuse your money. You are normal, you're just like her. Your kids could have a private education, but you're bad parents. So Brexit has been quite obviously a massive disaster. Is it time to say sorry, Anne?
No. First of all, it hasn't been a massive disaster. The only thing I regret about Brexit is that it was never done properly.
The wrong kind of Brexit.
No, let me finish. You've just had a very good spiel putting one side. Now just let me put the other. The side
that the newspapers don't put. That side, yeah. Go ahead, Anne. I'm all ears, genuinely.
Well, I do hope you are all ears. What I was saying was that we did not do Brexit properly. Not the wrong kind of Brexit. We just didn't do Brexit properly. For example, there were thousands and thousands, and I do mean thousands, of EU regulations which we could have got rid of over the course of the last 4 years. Nobody suggesting you do it in the first 4 minutes.
Could you just tell us which ones were bad? Because a lot of EU regulations are really sensible, so I'm just interested out the thousands and thousands.
Well, I don't know.
So you don't know which ones are bad? We just throw them all out?
I didn't say that. I'm sorry, Matthew. I'm not going to continue with this because I didn't say that.
Oh, sorry, I misunderstood. Sorry.
Yes, good. I'm glad you did. What I was saying to you was that there are thousands of EU regulations. For example, it's taken us 4 years to finally ban live exports. We could have done that in the first 6 months. The fiddling around with visa rules that we see now, other countries which have borders with the EU don't have those problems. What we have is a determination to make it as difficult for us as possible. And instead of whimpering and saying, oh dear, we should give up our sovereignty in order to have a faster visa queue, what we should be doing is taking a much stronger stand and saying, right, you make it as difficult as possible, but we're going ahead. Now, you wouldn't have had the Pacific trade deal, for example, without Brexit. That is well worth having. You wouldn't be able to, although we haven't done it, get rid of thousands of pettifogging, business-restricting regulations.
Sorry to interrupt, Anne, but can I just ask about the politicians who told us things before the referendum which have subsequently become patently untrue? So Michael Gove saying Brexit would be good for the environment. We've just legitimised the use of pesticides that kill bees that the EU has banned. Daniel Hannan promised business would have access to the single market if we voted leave. We didn't. He then pushed on for the hardest possible Brexit. Boris Johnson said our fishermen would be supported. They're £70 million a year worse off. I could go on and on. Should we not have some kind of apology for those lies or mistruths, Anne?
Well, the biggest lies that were told before the referendum were actually told by the Remain campaign, led by the then Prime Minister Lord Cameron. He wasn't a Lord then, of course, who said very specifically, and it was all there, that if we dared to vote yes, never mind leave, if we actually just voted to leave, there was going to be an immediate austerity budget, there was going to be an immediate rise in unemployment, there was going to be an immediate collapse of British business. It's all there on the record. This is what they were telling us. None of that happened.
But unemployment is going up, Anne.
Not even you.
Unemployment is up, Anne. And unemployment is up.
And it was never up when we were in the EU.
It also went down when we were in the EU. 4 million with Margaret Thatcher to 1 million just before we left. I mean, you're just not telling the truth, Anne, are you?
Matthew, right, what you won't do is let me have a word in edgeways.
You've had 4 minutes non-stop, Anne. I'm just asking questions. Have a lovely morning yourself, Anne. And therein, I would suggest, ladies and gentlemen, is the problem with Brexit. Been gaslit by one of the great advocates of Brexit. Every time I try and introduce the issues that trouble me, the lies told by Anne Widdecombe's colleagues, former colleagues, I'm being told that I'm interrupting her, that I'm rude. How are we ever going to move on with such intransigence? I have to ask. 0345 6060 973 is the number for your calls. And there was me thinking I could bring Remain and Leave together to work harmoniously to solve our country's problems.
Integration is not the problem. Integration is not a problem of faith. It's a problem of poverty, deprivation and privilege. And it's the these far-right people rioting that are not integrating.
How do we deal with it, Claire? How do you address it? I hear your anger. I hear your upset. I share it. But how do you deal with it? That's really what we've got to wrestle with.
Well, what I want to happen this week, I want Nigel Farage being investigated by the Standards
for not
Committee.
Criticising. I mean, he hasn't criticised the rioters. In fact, if anything, he's criticised.
He's been fueling it. This is Trump's. He's doing Trump's playbook that led to the 6th of January insurrection. He's playing the exact same.
He said the police were holding. He said the police were holding back information, which is what Nick has just alluded to. That's another common, tool in this kind of rabble rousing.
The communities this week has been heartwarming.
Yes, it has.
Of all faiths, helping one another, supporting, defending, white Christians defending mosques.
Yes.
This integration. Kemi Badenoch did a piece in the Telegraph yesterday saying integration is not working.
Says a woman whose government did absolutely naffle to improve integration. Claire, got to leave it there, I'm afraid, but I do share your anger. I share your passion, but I am left wondering, what can we do about it? No one has gone to prison. More than £60 billion of your money has been paid out in rewards to shareholders. And not a single stretch of any river in England can be classed as in good health. Which kind of brings me to Just Stop Oil. What kind of justice is it that rewards the lucky few who run water companies so badly they make their customers sick, but jails anyone determined to highlight the dangers of fossil fuels, and jails them for longer than the same judge chose to incarcerate sex offenders? Some Just Stop Oil activists, I know they sound like extremists ranting and railing against fossil fuels and global warming, but there is hard science behind their claims. Hard science the impartial judge, Christopher Hehe, decided had no place being aired in court. What's more, the boys and girls in blue are already questioning the judge's argument that the punitive sentences handed out to the Just Stop Oil protesters would act as a deterrent, as the Rozzers are already expecting more protests in response. If you caught the start of the show, you'd have heard me reiterate how most farmers voted for Brexit. Had they not, this country wouldn't be £100 billion a year worse off as far as trade with the EU goes, and Rachel Reeves wouldn't necessarily be looking at taxing family farms to make up the difference, which ultimately, people aren't going to like the question, but it does beg the question whether farmers are simply reaping what they sowed. You can't look at the issue of family taxes or inheritance tax on family farms. You can't look at it separately from Brexit, because the costs of Brexit are hurting this country and the Chancellor's trying to make up that difference. But, of course, with Starmer and Reeves refusing to move any of their self-imposed red lines to re-engage with the EU, with growth flatlining, the Chancellor's had a bumpy ride with a budget trying to raise billions to fix this country after 14 years of appalling mismanagement. Now, they promised Labour not to raise income tax and have had to look elsewhere to find money to meet bills. Going after pensioners, not all of whom are poor, I accept, but many of whom are, has proven massively unpopular. Is subjecting family farms to inheritance tax just as controversial, especially when you bear in mind that the curious poster boy for modern farmers these days, the slap-happy motoring hack Jeremy Clarkson, famously told The Times 3 years ago that he only bought his £4.25 million family farm to avoid paying inheritance tax in the first place. Oops. That's not to say that Labour's handling of the inheritance tax situation has been laudable, far from it. And Starmer insists 3/4 of farmers won't pay a penny in inheritance tax. Hooray! But farmers then point to DEFRA figures that suggest 66% of farm businesses are worth more than the £1 million threshold at which inheritance tax will now have to be paid. Although that itself is slightly more... It's not really as clear as that, because Starmer counters that by pointing out how farmers must add the £1 million for the farmland to the £1 million exemption for your spouse. And he says that, so for most couples with a farm wanting to hand on to their children, he says the realistic limit at where you're going to pay inheritance tax is actually £3 million. He insists, Starmer, that we just need to, I'm quoting, we just need to keep explaining how that works, because I know it's caused some anxiety. Is explaining how it works enough to deter farmers from protesting? Probably not. What if Starmer said, hey farmers, let's go back into a customs union with the EU to boost UK trade and help British farms rather than hit them with a new inheritance tax? Would that satisfy farmers like those in the North East who voted by nearly 60% for Brexit? Source, Science Direct Journal of Rural Studies, January 2021. Because there's a strong argument that Starmer only needs to introduce an inheritance tax on farmers because of the huge financial cost of Brexit, which the majority of those self-same farmers voted for. Now, last week, The Guardian published a frankly eye-opening first-person piece by a farmer called Guy Singh Watson. And he describes how he looked into the detail of Labour's proposal with views on how large farms, he's got strong views on how large a farm needs to be economically viable. And he initially felt that the tax was iniquitous and unfair. But as I said, he looked into the details, realised that the threshold in reality is closer to 3 million. He says Labour should have done a better job of making it clear that it's kind of 3 million. Singh Watson then argues that more valuable farms, so he's broadly now in favour of the tax, having looked into the detail, and he actually argues that more valuable farms should pay increasingly high rates of inheritance tax. He says when a farm is worth £7 million or more, it should be on 40%, because he says that the Labour policy on taxing farms is going to protect small family farms from inheritance tax, but it's not going to protect big family farms. Maybe they shouldn't. What's more, Singh Watson highlights a missed opportunity, he says, where the Chancellor could have chosen to go after farmers who sell land with planning permission instead of going for the inheritance tax changes, because planning permission can increase farmland values 100-fold, but farmers who benefit from such windfalls can pay no tax whatsoever on that deal if the cash is reinvested in more land. Singh Watson concludes that taxing these capital gains could arguably have raised more money than the current posse would probably be far less contentious. So I'm saying my starting point for this is farmers in the majority voted for Brexit. Brexit has cost this country a pretty penny. We are now looking for ways to make up that loss. Should farmers bear some of that cost? Should they? Should some farmers bear some of that cost? They're paying inheritance tax at half the rate of everybody else. Well, Tom Bradshaw is the National Farmers Union president. Joins me first. Good morning to you, sir.
Good morning.
So you've got one small farmer, at least, who feels that the position Labour's taken is fair.
Although I think he summed it up by saying it's the wrong tool, it's a blunt instrument, it could have been done much better.
Yes.
If we keep on getting to this £3 million figure that Sir Keir Starmer tried to trundle out on Friday, if that's the figure that government now believe should be in place, why don't we just move the limit to £3 million?
I totally agree, Tom. I can't argue with that because it just seems so much clearer to me, and I think to the listeners and to your members. Yeah, I do.
But also every individual circumstance. Look, the human impact of this is the bit that I'm struggling with most. When I get a letter from a 93-year-old that until 1:30 p.m. on Wednesday the 30th of October, the best tax advice was for them to keep their asset until death. That changed overnight. They are not going to live for the next 7 years. They have no way of gifting that farm to the next generation without paying exorbitant tax. That is something which is simply not acceptable.
But things change, Tom, and farmers who voted overwhelmingly for Brexit.
Where do you get that figure from? Where do you get that figure from? That was one from the Northeast, 60%.
So
is that overwhelming?
No, that was one of the figures that I came from the paper that I read out the details for. The sources Science Direct Journal of Rural Studies, January 2021. It's a huge, long paper. It goes through region by region, sex by sex, different levels of what level of employment you have within the farm. And trust me, the paper makes an overwhelming case that farmers voted for Brexit. And unless you have information to the contrary, we'll have to go with that. So you voted overwhelmingly for Brexit. Overnight, I lost my right to live in Europe, to stay wherever I wanted. That's what farmers voted for. The country's £100 billion a year worse off. That's what farmers voted for. And now the government's trying to make up the shortfall. Farmers should suck it up.
In this election campaign, Labour ruled out changing IHT. That's what people voted for. They ruled out changing agricultural property relief. Where they were elected, it wasn't in their manifesto, but Steve Reid stood up on a platform said, we will not be changing agricultural property relief. So if you use your argument, people elected this government on the basis they would not change agricultural property relief. That's
not my argument. My argument is the farmers voted for something that's made this country £100 billion a year worse off. The government's looking at ways of making up that difference. And some farmers, a very small proportion of farmers, are going to have to pay a bit.
No, I mean, I think you're looking at this through completely the wrong lens. We have the third cheapest food in the world. We have the cheapest food in Western Europe. And unfortunately, farms are not generating a great enough profit from producing the country's food, which I'm sure everyone listening to your programme wants to be able to access homegrown, high-quality British food 3 times a day. Unfortunately, the margins we're making from that are just so low. The reinvestment in our farms is going to suffer because of this change to inheritance tax.
I agree with all the difficulties that farmers are facing, but I'll say again, voting for Brexit has injured British farming. It's injured Britain, and it seems only fair that those that favoured it should pay for it.
No, I think you're pinning this on completely the wrong group of people.
I wouldn't expect the president of the National Farmers Union to say anything else, Tom.
52% of society voted for Brexit. Farming is only a very small proportion of that.
I think the overall of farmers was 58%, so significantly higher than the actual national average. Your thoughts?
I think the politicians are playing a blinder here. They're trying to get the population arguing amongst itself while they wander off and do awful things with the country. If you want to look at it as a financial equation, the average farm income after all the outgoings, you're down into the 20,000s. A farm is not money in the bank. A farm is not something that you can go out and spend a bit of it and have in a nice cruise or a holiday or whatever. It's a factory floor, and it produces the food that the nation needs to eat. And
or you can sell it for planning permission for 100-fold and not pay any tax on it.
What's that got? No. Oh, I'm sorry, Matthew. I've never heard such rubbish in all my life.
Well, it's from a farmer, Guy Singh Watson in The Guardian, a fellow farmer. So that's his view.
And he reckons he can sell land for development without paying capital gains tax.
He says that if you reinvest, it's factual, I checked, you can reinvest the money from land sold for property back into land and you don't have to pay tax on it. That's true.
And you can do that with any business asset. It's absolutely not confined to farming.
Yeah, but not many people have loads of acres, do they?
It's called rollover relief, and I intend to do it.
So it's not all about
that.
food then, is it, as we just established? You said it's all about food, and we've just paid to that. It's not all about food.
I am talking about the food production industry.
Right.
I am one of the lucky ones. The Secretary of State for Trade and Industry is taking my farm off me.
How
it's
so?
been hanging over this farm for 60 years.
60 years? Gosh.
Yes. I was at school when this farce started.
Which farce?
And I think it's going to come to an end.
Which farce? I don't know what you're talking about, sir.
Up in Tameside, well, around any city, you will have land that has been tacitly greenbelt, but which every town planner since Adam knows is going to go for redevelopment. My dad walked away from this farm in 1966 because the ministry stopped putting in subsidies because it's going to go for development. 60 years later, it looks like we've got a live one. And the only reason we've got a live one is because one Jonathan Reynolds, now Secretary of State for Trade and Industry, decided to make his legacy the creation of a 2,000-home residential estate. So this land, which was Greenbelt, was removed from the Greenbelt in February this year. There is a Red Edge residential, and it's going.
Okay, I mean, I've got absolutely no idea what that's got to do with the discussion. Let's return to the theme at hand in our first phone in this morning, which is, where did all the rioters go? They were supposed to turn up on Wednesday and again last night, and all but vanished. Chantel's first on the line, and a first-time caller too, ringing in from Brentwood. Good morning to you, Chantel.
Morning.
Morning. Where did the rioters go, then, in your opinion?
Personally, I do feel like there's been a bit of an agenda here in terms of silencing the public. I think that the majority of the public have a very valid point as far as their concerns being ignored by the government, and it seems that this government has come down extremely hard on people.
Can you demonstrate, Chantel, where you get the word majority from and back it up with any facts? Because I don't think you're right. I've never seen a majority saying that they don't like migration. In fact, all the data I'm seeing is it's actually a minority. 55% of Brits are welcoming, and it went up to, I think, 85% of people condemning the riots. So you're not right to call a majority, are you? It's a minority of people.
I think it's quite simplistic to look at it like that, actually.
You were the one that said it was a majority. I'm just correcting you because it isn't. It's a minority.
Yeah. If you'd let me get to my point.
Well, I can't let you tell lies, though. You'll accept that, Chantel. I can't let you tell lies. It wasn't a majority, it's a minority. But now carry on.
Obviously, not the majority of the population was on the streets, but it would seem that a lot of the population, if I correct myself, have voted against the direction that we're heading in.
By voting for Labour.
I think it's quite simplistic to say that it's anti-migration. I think that the concerns have been made quite clear by people if you just look beyond the veil of the media, that it's a much more complex
You're talking
issue.
about a political debate. I'm talking about a bunch of neo-Nazis burning down citizens' advice bureaus and libraries, hurling abuse at people with different coloured skin.
I'm black, and I was in the Black Lives Matter protest, and I would say that a lot of the behaviours that I saw in the protests, and we're calling them protests, are not that different to the behaviour that we're seeing in riots. And granted, there are some very, very extreme people that were there who behaved in ways that we can all condemn. I think it's very unfair to suggest that the majority of
Sorry, Chantal, I'm struggling with your comparison of the Black Lives Matter demonstrations and protests were like the riots, but they weren't. There were no riots.
But the behaviours in which people are being, most strongly reprimanded for and arrested for, they're not that different. It all comes down to semantics a lot of the time, and I think
rioting is the same as protesting, is what you're kind of saying, which I don't think it is.
I'm saying that people that are protesting are being called rioters, and people that are rioting have often been called
rioters are called rioters.
On the narrative of the media station that's reporting.
Well, let me be absolutely crystal clear, Chantal. Crystal clear, for no doubt. I'm talking about the rioters. Where did they go? The ones that were out last week, burning down citizens' advice bureaus, hurling abuse at anybody that wasn't white, burning down libraries, assaulting police officers, assaulting police dogs, burning cars, causing millions of pounds of damage to this country, setting the criminal justice system back even further. Where were they last night?
Hopefully, if they were violent criminals, they've been dealt with by the law and arrested, or have seen that from the response of the government that they're not welcome on the streets to be violent. And like I said, I think it's
so. The law, for you, it's the law that's done it. The prospect of
the
prison.
reaction has been huge, hasn't it? It's become a huge race debate. There's people getting arrested for.
To be fair, there's been a race debate going on for
tweeting.
10 years. I mean, we've talked about little else in this country apart from foreigners, to the detriment of almost every aspect of British life. I mean, it's ridiculous to say there's no debate about race. That's all we've talked about. I mean, that's what Brexit was about, wasn't it? Controlling our borders, stopping more foreigners from coming here. That's what I was told it was about.
I think emphasis on illegally, though. It's very dangerous. I think that the conversation has shifted from,
Well, but that's because the number of illegal migrants coming here is tiny, isn't it, compared to the number of legal migrants? 750. Because the number of people coming by boat is tiny by comparison to the number of legal migrants. So the argument that we've got to stop them coming by boats doesn't really tackle the issue of migration. Chris is calling from Croydon. What can the Tories do to save themselves from electoral oblivion is the question. Good morning to you, Chris. What are your ideas?
Well, yes. Good morning, Matthew. I think they can only mitigate it a bit because I think, I don't know if you remember Jim Callaghan, thoroughly deep bloke, yes. He quoted Ecclesiastes. There comes a time in the tide, the tide just turns, and there's nothing you can do about it. So whatever happens, the public feel it's time for a change, and that's it. And that's fair enough. Right. It's the essence of democracy. But the point is, I'm very disappointed that this government hasn't done more to correct the abuses of human rights legislation. That's proved to be an overflowing trough for the legal profession, and with it, mass illegal immigration. Because you say the mass, but the most migration is on legal migration, isn't it? It's record-breaking legal migration. It dwarfs the illegal migration. Yes, but at least those people, what skills they have, what contribution they can make. We could always ask the irregular migrants what skills they have, but we choose not to. Yes. Well, if they did have skills, then they could apply for a job, couldn't they? No, but we don't ask them. We just put them on a plane to Rwanda is the current government plan. We won't ask if they're a brain surgeon or a lorry driver. We don't ask. We just deport. Yes, but the point is, the wider issue is this. This country is, by all accepted scientific criteria, already overpopulated. What scientific criteria is that, Chris? Because I've looked into this professionally for years, and as far as I know, what you're talking is bunkum, complete bunkum. Okay, so what reports? Okay, we'll give David Attenborough a buzz for a start. I'm sure he'd be... He says the planet is overcrowded, not the country, David Attenborough. He says the planet's overcrowded. No, okay. If you want, the country has 11%. It's under 11% developed. So by any measure, 11% of development means the country is not bursting. It's just not. Please, Matthew, can you please let me give an answer to that? No, that is absolute nonsense. You're talking. Well, give us an answer then. Because look. When a country is overpopulated, it means that the impact of the lifestyle of its population is damaging the environment. Do you know what our population density is? Can I carry on without an interruption? Not if you're going to shout like that, sir. We're not having shouting, sir. What is the population density in the UK? Do you know? Because I do. The population density in the UK is one of the highest in Europe. No, it isn't. It's 279 people kilometres squared. That's what the population density is. It's less in Scandinavia. I'll give you that. It is less in Scandinavia. Yes, the point is this, Matthew. You said we're overcrowded. Do you know what the population is in Rafa at the moment? 22,000 people per square kilometre. 22,000. Please, Matthew, can I just please say, I'll lower my voice. Look, you're confusing overcrowding with overpopulation. Overcrowding just means too many objects in the same place at the same time. Oxford Street is overcrowded on Saturday afternoon. You should go, sir. It isn't anymore. Can I just carry on just for 20 seconds? Well, if you just keep talking,
palpable nonsense. It's, I can let you drone on, but then we have to address it all, don't we? So Oxford Street is suffering from closed shops, just like every other high street. The footfall isn't like it used to be. It's going down, Chris. It's not going up, like you say.
Look, the point is I'm making, I'm always just giving an example of an overcrowded place. Because there are that is too many objects in the place at any given time. Overpopulation is when the impact of a population's lifestyle degrades the natural environment faster than nature can heal it. We're seeing this, for example, in our water supplies, which are becoming polluted faster than the
Chris, you've had a good run, mate. You're just talking absolute rubbish. The water companies don't work because all the money we pay for our water bills have been funneled out and squirreled away by the hedge fund investors from international companies that piled in when it was privatised. Oxford Street, which you cite as overcrowded, has lower footfall today than it's ever had, as far as I know, in recent times. Where population density is not as high as many other countries in the world. But we can take the view that all I've said is rubbish, but I've got facts. 279 people, kilometre squared.